Okay, we are live and it is 10 o'clock and we are going to continue our discussion on H 433. And we have with us this morning Riley Allen, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Public Service. And what section of the bill would you like to speak on?
I believe it's section 21.
Section 21, you are correct. Yes, okay. Go right ahead. And
Okay, well, I apologize. I've been in a kind of a series of meetings this morning.
all right, no problem.
Feeling a little flat-footed here. So for the record, Riley Allen, Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Service. I'm here to testify on section 21 of the transportation bill. That bill has, I think, given a brief kind of overview of the section to this committee as it was introduced earlier in the year. But in broad terms, what this section is seeking to do is to establish a framework for essentially requiring all of Vermont's distribution utilities to establish a dedicated electric vehicle rate or pricing framework. And probably the most compelling reason, there are probably many reasons to be thinking along these lines, but at least the one that I find most compelling is there's a very real, I think, concern over time that this load is large. And if you, even apart from everything else, if you were to kind of flip the switch kind of overnight and ask yourself, how much does all of our transportation loads add to the grid in terms of kilowatt hours? I estimate it's something in the neighborhood of 40%. That's significant. And if you concentrate those loads during essentially a small window of hours during the day, like when people arrive home from shopping or business or work at the end of the day, that creates a significant spike in the loads if it's between like 5 and 8 in the evening. And that's typically when we peak anyways. And so what we're doing is potentially creating a significant challenge for the grid if we leave these loads kind of unmanaged. Not all of those loads would be kind of materializing at the same time, and a lot of level 1 charging, that is the lower 120 volt charging, would be occurring too. But if you have the higher voltage charging occurring, disproportionately in that window, it has bearing on the electric system and the cost of the electric system. It's not just the bulk transmission system, which would, over a longer time frame could lead to costs in the hundreds of millions, but also at the distribution system level. But with respect to rate design, what we have is probably the most flexible load we've ever seen. That is, electric vehicles, people drive their electric vehicle typically less than 2 hours out of a 24-hour day. We're talking about something that's less than 10% of the time. That means that we have 90 or 93% of the time to kind of decide when to recharge our vehicle. There's just incredible flexibility there. The closest thing we have in most households today is a water heater, and you do see water heaters on load controls. And you can choose different pathways for essentially managing these loads, but you want to encourage people to participate in these rate designs. And so there's some complexity to kind of creating a framework that works and gets people to participate and to allow their loads to be managed, but it requires generally a discount. I think of it as a compensation for grid services that anyone that participates in this rate. So when you reduce my load during the peak hours, that has value to the system and in all other ratepayers. And I can also harvest services that can be sold to ISO New England in terms of frequency regulation and other other things that are out there, and it's really, I don't want to get into details there, but this load is unique. It's unique both in the opportunity to create benefit that is consistent with ratepayer value and with our climate goals, but it also creates risks if these loads go unmanaged that are very material to all ratepayers in the state. It's very important in my mind that our utilities get ahead of this before it becomes a problem. And I think it's of special concern to me because I'm an optimist when it comes to electric vehicles. I think they're coming. I think they're coming kind of sooner and faster than other people do. But even if it takes longer, it's still a kind of a material risk over time. But what the legislation proposes is a time frame for all of our utilities to establish these rates for the Public Utility Commission to essentially identify the characteristics of the rate that would be required of the utilities, and for the obligation to not fall into place until June of 2024. So to give them all plenty of room to do this. And the good news is we have a couple of our utilities are essentially ahead of the curve and are kind of demonstrating the what's and how's and demonstrating that this can work well. We'd just like to see it work over time with all of our distribution utilities so that ratepayers aren't exposed to what I consider the kind of overinvestment, the buildup of our system to address the potential challenges that would otherwise materialize. So I'll pause there for questions.
Do you see any difference in the, because more people are working from home? Is that a factor at all? Because they're not going into an office, and that there's got to be some shift there because there's so many thousands of people now working from home.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and it does. I think it lays some of my anxieties to the extent that this persists beyond the pandemic. That there is kind of less of the 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 kind of travel patterns. I think that does provide kind of a mitigating concern on the issue of people arriving home, plugging in their vehicle, not thinking about it any further. But still, I think the loads are large enough and significant, even if a half of customers were suddenly on a different pattern, the concern is still there. And I think it's a sensible thing, even if this pandemic has created some permanent shifts in the location of work patterns.
Questions? Yes, Senator Birchlick.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, did you say 40% increase? Was that your estimate if we just changed overnight all passenger cars?
Yeah, I mean, we have something in the neighborhood of 600,000 registered vehicles, almost one per person. Typically more than 2 vehicles per household, and I think there is potentially a little bit of room for improvement on my back of the envelope, but the broader point is it's a material load, and the 40% wouldn't be that bad because we actually have a lot of headroom in our system right now. But at some point, you can erode that headroom. And this is a load that if it's concentrated in just a few hours, even if only half of it's concentrated in just a few hours, it presents potential material risks of significant costs on ratepayers and on the system.
Right. All right. I just want to clarify that. And then this committee has sent this part of the T-bill over to finance. I don't know if they've contacted you. I'm going to be over there Tuesday just to present it to them, but I'm sure they're going to want to hear from you and the utilities on it. One of the questions, and I don't know if you were going to go into this, but this committee had for the department was how utilities incentives for electric vehicles line up with the incentives for electric vehicles in the T-bill. So if the state is offering these incentives and utility is offering additional incentives, like we were talking about electric bikes before we went live a little bit. So if they offer $10 and the state offers $200, they still get the full credit under their renewable energy obligations. Or for the electric car example, if the state is paying $3,000 or even more in some instances for low income, and then utility offers some small amount, like we were just wondering about that stacking of incentives and the credit that the utilities are getting basically on the backs of the state incentive. So that does the department worry at all about this kind of riding of the utilities on the state incentives?
If I could, I'm going to lean on my colleague, who I believe is participating in this, TJ Poor. I think he was.
Yeah, he's there.
Ask him to join us. So if I can turn it over to him.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, thanks. And for the record, TJ Poor, Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources at the Department of Public Service. And to answer your question, yes, all the utilities offer electric vehicle incentives, and they range from $500 to up to, I think, $2,400, depending on the utility and your income. The utilities also, the state incentives are delivered through no-cost contracts with the utilities. So they're kind of a seamless transaction for the customer. The utilities do, for each vehicle, claim the credit. There's a lot of entities that are providing support. I mean, there's the state support for the electric vehicle charging station supply equipment. There's other private support. There's a lot of entities kind of working in this direction. But as far as the fossil fuel reduction savings, the utilities are claiming 100% of that credit. We did this year a literature review, essentially, to see, this is a very high level look on, is there, are electric vehicle customers free riders? Like, would they have been purchasing electric vehicles anyway, but for the state incentives, or but for any incentives, actually? And what we found is that there wasn't a whole lot of research on it, but that incentives did seem to matter. It doesn't get to the heart of your question of, does the utility incentive matter compared to the state incentive? But one thing that the research did show is that the bigger the incentive, particularly for low income, it did start to make a difference. And there's a inverse relationship there with your income as well, as you might imagine. So we don't have an answer to that question, but we're thinking about it in terms of how these plans are rolled out and the electric vehicle incentives that are on top of it. And to give you one more data point I'll just share, is to give you a sense of scale. In both 2019 and 2020, the electric vehicles made up about 8% and 9% respectively of the total utility fossil fuel reduction claim. So, a meaningful but small percentage of their claim.
Well, what I'm wondering, if the department is worried about just unintended consequences, or maybe intended consequences of the utilities lowering their incentives, and basically, when it comes to us in the transportation committee, not to get too far into like rate making and the impact on electric rates, but could the utility say like, hey, why do we need to put any more money in? Let's lower ours to $100. And that puts pressure on the state to increase their incentive from 3,000 to 5,000. If they're doing it for regulatory obligation purposes only, they have no incentive to increase it or keep it where it's at. They could lower it to $50, but their obligation as far as to the state is the same, whether it's $50 or $1,000. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah.
how we as a state, the both sides of it are coordinating on that.
I do think there's some, there's potential for that. We haven't seen it. I did mention that on the low end, $500 are the incentive, but that was increased from, I think it was 250 for that utility a year ago. So even with the state incentives coming, the utilities have been increasing their electric vehicle incentives. So we haven't seen that come to fruition, but we are certainly paying attention to it. And there is kind of this question of should the same credit be given to that utility that's providing only a $500 incentive versus one that's providing $2,400 or $1,800 would be comparable there for non-low income customers. So we yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for legislators, the question is, what pocket do we want the money to come from? Because we could say we're not going to do the $3 million for the incentives because we want the utilities to do more, and then it's paid for more by ratepayers. Or we could say we don't want ratepayers to pay for it. We want to have, so we're going to increase the incentive. So right now we have this federal money, so it's not as tight. But I can picture in a future year when the current $3 million, if we pass it as that is done, and then people are like, well, we need more money for electric vehicles incentives. There's a question of should it come from the general tax base or from ratepayers if there is this obligation on the utilities. So it's just kind of a question to be.
Senator Kitchell could jump in on this one. She handles all the money.
Now, I think really that we're trying to get an understanding of the interplay or that we not create a situation that in fact creates greater pressure on the state funding source. So I do think we have a chart there, but this gets into an area that we kind of have to look at things comprehensively rather than ad hoc bit by bit. I think that's really the heart of the discussion here, and to make sure that an investment in one place doesn't create the motivation to reduce it in another place. I think that's really the issue here that's being advanced or we're talking about. And I think that our concern is that it's going to take collective effort and not create some kind of perverse incentive to scale back and still end up getting the same recognition in terms of carbon reduction emissions. So I think this is important to sort out and figure out, do we need to put, I don't know, I guess I'm not sure where Senator Perchlik's going in terms of, are there parameters that we should put in terms of this is after explore, it's like we always do, this money doesn't kick in until you have exercised all the other available and eligibility for all the other incentives.
Right. Well, I think Mr. Allen and Ms. Boomhauer would probably say that and back me up that the first cost barrier still is the biggest barrier, and I'd be hesitant to limit to do anything that kind of limits the incentives going forward unduly. There is there's going to be a point in time where we do, whether that's 3 years from now or 5 years or 1 year, where it'll be appropriate to start scaling back incentives. But
I wasn't even talking
yet.
I wasn't talking about that. I was really talking about making sure that for the state incentives, they kick in, and not to diminish them in any way, but to make sure that the other, which first dollars or so forth to you explore, and if you're eligible, and then make sure we're doing getting the full return on what's out there, and then what the state incentive would be. So collectively, it would be a greater investment than one saying, gee, with that incentive, I can cut back on mine. That's what I think we want to protect against, not to diminish anything, but in fact to preserve the collective value.
Yeah.
Is that
it's like
a
what we
good
do-
is that a good way of describing your question you're raising of the issue, Andy?
Yeah, and I don't have language or anything. I think and I was interested if the department was thinking about it, and just that we should think about it as we go forward in future years. But it's similar to what we do with college tuition grants that the state offers, that it's last dollar, not first dollar. So we say, we'll give you this money, but you got to go get the federal money. You got to get the other incentives. So we're making sure that those obligations are reduced because we're doing it. So I wouldn't want the utilities to think, or at least it's a question, do we want the utilities to lower their incentive first, or our incentive first when we get to this thing and that Mr. Poor was talking about in the future, where we don't need as many incentives, for example? Which of those, since we have two different incentives coming from two different sources, which one do we want to increase or decrease when needed? It's just kind of something to be aware of. And maybe it's more of a question for finance, because it affects electric ratepayers.
Right. Well, and I'll just note that I think this is to your point, Senator Perchlik, that the utilities do have an obligation to reduce fossil fuels, and they need to have some skin in the game. They don't just have to take credit for reducing fossil fuels when it's really the state investment that's doing that. So
Right.
I think that is a concern, and we do review measures annually. There's a technical advisory group, and we can raise this concern and make sure that we're not doing that, because I think we're all on the same page here.
Okay.
Michelle's hand.
I would just add at this point that it will be important, and I think TJ makes a great point about this technical advisory committee that could provide guidance, but we need to continue to make sure that whatever the decisions are with regard to the state provided incentives, that we continue to make it administratively expedient in terms of our ability to implement this, and that the customer is not caught up in this sort of back office discussion related to and navigating related to whose dollar pays first and last. So if we could just keep that in mind as we're moving forward, that would be helpful.
Okay. Questions, comments? Anybody else? I see nobody. Yes, go right ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just, this does actually kind of link a little bit to the rate design question, because I think the conversation about rate design is sometimes confused or conflated with the issue of incentives to adopt electric vehicles and the like. And in fact, it does have that kind of positive kind of side benefit, I believe, that if you lower the costs of essentially the refueling vehicles, that's invariably going to have an economic impact that is going to potentially motivate people to either buy their electric vehicles or use their electric vehicles more or whatnot. But what I was alluding to before is not so much focused on the issue of motivation, but motivating people, in addition to the other kind of incentives that are offered on the upfront costs of the vehicle, either through the Tier 3 programs or the state and federal incentives, but is really focused on the benefit, the system benefits that can be harvested through a discounted rate. If you can kind of discount a rate and allow the utility to choreograph or manage those loads, it has immense potential to benefit the system. And I'm just trying to kind of call that out as distinct, because I think some of our utilities do kind of conflate the two. Gee, what we're trying to do through a discounted rate is to motivate the adoption and use of electric vehicles, and that is true. But the justification is more based on kind of fairness to all consumers and to properly assign the value that is being harvested by the system from participating electric vehicle customers in these discounted rates.
Utilities, what is it? Green Mountain Power, City of Burlington. How many others utilities are there in Vermont?
There's 17 distribution utilities, and then of course there's Velco, but they're at the retail level, there's 17 distribution
Is
utilities.
it really 17? Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big number. Didn't realize it was that. Must have some small ones out there too.
Very small ones.
Yeah.
You have like Hardwick Electric, Lindenville Electric. I mean,
Right.
there's some, Orleans has got, so we've got quite a number of relatively small ones.
I didn't
Yeah,
realize-
VEPSA represents them. There's about 11 of them in VEPSA that they're all
Uh-huh.
combined.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize there was that many. I know Green Mountain Power is the biggest. Is that correct? They're the largest.
They're, yeah, 75%, 77% of the load, I believe.
Wow. Who's second?
It's either, I think it's VEC and then Burlington Electric.
Wow. Huh. It's interesting. I didn't realize it's that much they control. Okay, questions any further on this subject? Yes, go ahead. Who's next? I can't see, just speak up. I
another-
can't see you all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, I was trying to look at the language really quickly, but I didn't find it. But you don't talk about in there at all the issue of the kilowatt hour charge for the infrastructure cost, which this committee has talked a lot about. And I know in other years we had all the reports and went back and forth on it. So I don't want to get into all that, but I didn't know I know that AOT is working on it, but I didn't know if that was part of the charge to the utilities to start thinking about that, specifically the public charging stations, or if that's just being dealt with separately in what AOT is doing. And that's not addressed here at all. with
Yeah,
the-
it's not addressed here because I don't see that as a kind of a motivating factor here. If there is, a nexus, we can discuss that later. But the motivation here is, primarily kind of the system costs, and secondarily kind of helping to increase, adoption of electric vehicles, use of electric vehicles, and these other things. But those are the underlying motivations, and there is a nexus with the infrastructure conversation, and Shell's leading the charge on that with the study that they have underway.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, can you get Anthea earlier than we anticipated?
Yeah, I'll find her.
See if we can find her and we can continue on because we're on the floor at 11:30. For this, the committee, this is a little different than years ago. We used to talk about transportation issues as transportation issues, and now we're into a lot of different subjects that we never had before. We used to talk about bridges and paving and roads and
Hmm.
how things change. Yeah.
Soon you'll have to get a garage to keep your collection of electric bikes.
I know. It's just what a changing world. Wow. Oh, well.
Yeah, to get sound on them, Senator Perchlik, he's going to have to get some baseball cards and put them on the spokes.
That's right. We used to do that on our bicycles. That's right. Boy, but the problem I'm having is hard to keep track of all the different rebates and incentives and everything else. There's a lot of them out there, and you coordinate them all. It's just difficult. So like I said, I didn't realize till this morning that we're talking about $200 for bicycles, electric bike, and the power companies are offering $200 or most of them. So, where is there a balance? Did everybody give that? Or I thought it was 200, now it's 400. And I encourage bicycles. I think they're great but I also know that they're not replacing automobiles for emissions. We know that. I mean, that's not going to happen. I'm sure some will be used for work in the summer months, but that's not a 12-month deal on bicycles. So how much do we really want to incentivize electric bikes?
Well, I guess the way it's set up is you get the incentive if you give up your car. The question is how rigorous we're going to be. And
You mean they're going to check and see if you have a car registered? But I mean,
Well, that's to replace your ride, but then there's the other thing in the T-bill, just an incentive for electric bikes. And then there's the utility incentive. So you can't stack them all if you're income eligible and get rid of a car. But that's kind of the question we're just having with the department. If there's different people doing incentives, whether it be electric cars or electric bikes for different reasons, we got to make sure as we go forward that it's being coordinated.
what determines the car? You're getting rid of your car. It's not registered your name any longer. I mean, so you
well,
put
they
it,
had all the requirements in the language about it, what you have to do to demonstrate that it has been taken off the road and it has been disabled and it's no longer functioning. So there's language in there that puts in what taking it off the road requires.
well, Anthea, thank you for coming early. We're running ahead this morning. It'd be nice to move into our next subject. And you're continuing are going through the bill. Is that it? You and Michelle?
So for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from Legislative Council. I think we're done with the walkthrough. You now have everything, I believe, that has come up over the course of the last couple of weeks from the administration proposals, from the small changes that you requested me to make, the few things I flagged, Senator Perchlik's proposals. The one thing that and that's been incorporated into that side-by-side that I circulated yesterday. The one thing that's not there is the language that you heard testimony from DEC on this morning. I just heard back from Megan, and I think she's good with the language. It's currently with Chris, just to make sure that the transfer piece is being reflected accurately, because my understanding was that it was going to be a transfer from the Agency of Transportation to DEC. So I can show you that language now, but it might make sense to wait until JFO is given it a once over. So that's where things are with me. I'm happy to put up the side-by-side. I don't know if it's useful. Maybe there are sections that you can start closing out, or further guidance that you have to me on sections that you heard testimony on, or things that you want in there that you haven't heard testimony on. So I will take my lead from all of you.
Okay. Suggestions committee, where would we like to go from here? I know we're going to start closing out. We want any more testimony. We got side by side. What would you like to see on the screen? Yes.
I'm just looking at the side by side now, so maybe we could go through that and close out section with that document. That's my preference, I guess, but I'm open to anything.
We want to do the side by side? Jane, Rose, anybody?
It's fine. Because I think we've closed out sort of tentatively some sections. So I don't know if we're going to start from scratch or we're going to just identify those that are really open.
And I'm just following the lead on this. So whatever you guys decide.
I'm with Senator.
Well, we can do side by side and move very quickly with the ones that we don't have any issue, and see if we can close out some of the ones that
And if we want more,
had further discussion.
if we want more information, we'll just ask at this point. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I think we should go through. I think we sort of said we'd close them out, but we can officially close them out. I think we can go.
Yeah. We can confirm it, and it won't take very long to say, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I will put this up on the screen, and then I will take notes and put check marks next to the sections that you close out so that we have a record of that and I can circulate it afterwards.
Thank you.
So I am putting up on the screen the 3-column side by side that I circulated yesterday and is posted to the committee page. Just to refresh everyone's memory on the columns. The column all the way to the left is the first iteration of the T-bill. It was the proposed by the administration. The middle column is as it passed the House, and then the right column is as it passed the House with virtually all of the proposals that you've seen over the last 2 weeks. I think for purposes of the real use in this document, focusing on the middle column and the right column is probably the most beneficial, and kind of ignore the left column unless you really want to see sort of the very first version of the proposal or the language. So with that little introduction, section 1, this is going to be your adoption of the white book, except as it's amended, and the definitions, and then the correction of the one typographic error. The changes that you are seeing between the as passed version and what you've seen earlier in the week is the suggestion from me on the definition of electric bicycle for purposes of replace your ride and the electric bicycle incentives, and then the deletion of the definition of multi-unit dwelling, but you deal with that later on in Senator Perchlik's proposal with the more expansive multi-tiered definition of multi-unit affordable housing and multi-unit dwelling owned by a nonprofit. But aside from that, section 1 is super important and it adopts everything, but I don't really think there's much outstanding here.
Okay. All right, any,
Why do we put the definition of an electric bike here, but the definition of multi-unit somewhere else? It seems like that's not consistent. Should we put the definition of electric bike?
So that's an excellent question. The reason why I am suggesting that electric bicycle and PEV and EVSE be in this sort of upfront definition section is because they're used in multiple sections later on in the bill, whereas the multi-unit affordable housing and multi-unit dwelling owned by nonprofit is just used in one section, and it might sort of get lost through the bill, but you certainly could include all of your definitions in the beginning if you wanted to.
No, that you've answered my question.
electric bike, again, I'll raise this question again. Now, we're talking about $200, right? Incentive?
So there are 2 incentive programs that could be providing incentivization for electric bicycles. There's the one that is just exclusive to electric bicycles. It's $200. It's tiered to the higher income incentives, the higher income eligibility amounts under the existing program for new plug-in electric vehicles. There is also the possibility of an incentive that is up to $3,000 through the Replace Your Ride program that could also cover electric bicycles. But for that program, the person who was qualifying is giving up and having destroyed a vehicle. And that electric bicycle incentive could be, as Michelle has testified, as they're gonna, if you include this language, as they develop the program, kind of a package of options. Maybe you get some money towards an electric bicycle, some more money towards protective equipment for the electric bicycle, some money for transit passes, some money for car share vouchers. So it could be in conjunction with the suite of options that you have available to you if you avail yourself of the Replace Your Ride program.
If I replace my ride with a bicycle, you're saying you get $3,000?
Up to $3,000.
Now, that's that, okay, how long is that in effect? Is it 1 year, then you can go back to a vehicle? Is it forever, or how does that work?
I see Michelle's hand is up.
Okay. Michelle,
So-
go ahead.
Senator Mazza, this is a great question. We have not developed the program guidelines for Replace Your Ride yet. And I think we heard a little bit earlier in the week or last week that we would be structuring the amount of the incentive for a bicycle and the other opportunities for replacing your vehicle in a manner that would be appropriate to the, you know, what we're purchasing. So in other words, for a non-electric bike, it might be a lower amount. For electric bike, we might offer a little bit more, but we probably wouldn't give a $3,000 incentive for any kind of bicycle. We might give you a bicycle incentive along with a transit pass and maybe the ability to have a car share membership. So all those details are still going to be worked out as we develop the program, and we will scale them appropriately and then structure the options for folks that are getting the incentive. Does that make sense?
I just want to make sure that we don't get involved in some fraud schemes here, how to, get around the system. And that worries me because there are a lot of incentives. I just,
Yeah.
I like the incentives, but on the other hand, there's always a way to get around it. I
Yeah.
want to make sure that if we can protect it, and I know we're early on and there's going to be changes in the future. So this would kick in like July of this year after the bill is signed, then you'd have a year or so to look at it or. come
Yeah.
back.
Exactly. It's going to take some time to develop the program framework. And, I think the first thing we're going to work on is the procedures for how you could get an electric vehicle if you turn in a gas powered vehicle. And then we will develop secondarily the other incentive packages. There's a lot to work on there, but we want to do it as expediently as we can and start getting people into more efficient transportation.
I support the vehicle because certainly we're getting cars that are off the road with better, efficiencies and things. But bicycles are and we ought to encourage them. But I just have some concerns about bicycles getting incentives but if it'll work out, it'll work out, I guess. Any other questions on this subject? Okay, go right ahead. All right.
So we're closing out section 1.
I think so. Do I hear anything? Anybody have any
Yeah,
concerns?
these are just definitions. Yeah.
So I would say you can put like a soft close out of this, but since this is what adopts the whole book and you're going to make
Okay.
some changes to it, maybe just say like, we're
Alright.
good with the language, but because this is
Okay.
like the official, I'm adopting everything else in the white book section.
Thank you. All right, that explains it well. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so section 2, this is your Lamoille Valley Rail Trail language. This would be requiring it under statute to be and have the maintenance associated with it. Part of the proposal that comes from the administration each year in conjunction with the governor's budget and recommend as part of the transportation program, it would need to include these items for the maintenance of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. There have not been any proposed language changes to the language that was included in the T-bill as it passed the House, but this was not something that was originally included in the administration's proposal. And I know this is something that when I last left you with it, I think there were still some outstanding committee discussion on this.
I don't think we should have the language in there. I think it's taking a particular asset and a particular obligation that has to be there every year, and it's setting a bad precedent. I think it's almost getting back to the old days where we select things out and then you don't have the balance in the development of the plan. I think any more than any other areas of maintenance responsibility for the transportation system. So that's my view, is that to say somehow this particular trail rises to the to have this specialized treatment is counter to the whole decision making and planning process. And we saw it. Another trail said, we want to be added. We want to be added. And other projects are going to say, well, we should be added. And we should have specific reference that we have to be assured of, treatment within the annual plan. I don't think this is a good precedent to set. That's only
Okay.
my two.
Senator Pertwee?
Yeah, I think Senator Kitchell is correct, surprisingly. That's a joke.
So do I sense
Yes, I think we should take it out.
other
I
members?
agree.
Ready?
I agree.
Okay, it's out.
And there's some more discussion on that as well this morning, because I had a couple Republican senators in our caucus with the push of what Tom had shared with us for the letter yesterday. And it just seemed like it was trying to do exactly what Senator Kitchell had said, to set them above and beyond. And And I explained to the senators this morning that, that trail was already being maintained as we had that discussion yesterday. And they were like, well, it just seems like the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail was getting special preference. And I said, well, I don't really see that we see it as that. We're just trying to complete that trail to make it whole again. And we're not distinguishing really between it. We're not favoring any trail. We're just trying to finish one length of trail and keep them all together and keep them maintained and keep them on a good path.
Yeah, but this language actually would separate it out and give it preferential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep it on a good path. That's good, Senator Ingles. That's a good one. Keep it on
Yeah.
a good path.
Yeah, you'll be using that later today like you did yesterday. I'll be watching for it.
Okay, so I understand that is out. Do I hear any other voice to speak up? Because like I said, I can't see everybody on the screen, so. All right, you got that, Anthea?
Yep, I got it. I wrote remove next to it on my checklist.
Okay.
Okay, so your next section, section 3. So if you remember back to the governor's recommend, there was $5 million of one-time transportation fund monies for assortive initiatives and incentives. The House Transportation took the approach of basically using an additional 4.775 million for covering the town highway aid piece, additional money for electric vehicle incentives, the 375 for the emissions repair program, the 50,000 for the e-bikes, and to free up in fiscal year 2022 that additional money. They're basically doing a future swap with the portion of the $50 million in change that the state is getting in federal highway money through the December federal bill, using that in fiscal year 2022, when the agency's recommend and proposed approach was to use it in fiscal year 23. And I know you've heard testimony on that. So this section 3, is what frees up that additional money by making a swap in the maintenance budget. I think if you are going to deviate from the House's proposal of the additional 4.775 million, you want to use the same approach of using the maintenance budget for the swap, you can't close this section out until you determine what your number is.
And
you also
we're
could
going to
go
have
with
to,
the approach.
and this is what we would do if we added the additional money to the program to keep it the 750 or whatever. If we agree to that, we got to go back and increase the swap out.
Yes, so that's a perfect example. If you go with Mileage Smart's request of 750 as opposed to 600,000, you could increase this 4775 swap by 150,000.
It doesn't mean that there's any less money for maintenance. It's just the source of the dollars.
Yeah, so that's really important when you look at this language. And for the 2 members who are new to this committee, this chart is doing 2 things. It's telling you in the top half, this is how the money is authorized to be spent. So this an amount for personal services, an amount for operating expenses, an amount for grants. There are no changes there. And the total maintenance budget is being held steady in the amended at 103 million. Where you're getting your swap is just on the change from state to federal, but it is not modifying the authorizations that are necessary for the maintenance budget. You're keeping that as recommended by the governor.
Mm-hmm. So we have to keep that open, knowing it's if we want to put in additional money to keep the program from shutting down, that is how we would just go in and increase that substitution.
Comment on this?
Go ahead. Yep.
From the testimony, and I'm glad Michelle's still here, is I never heard Michelle say that that VTrans is opposed to this swap. I heard her say, and tell me if this is incorrect, that she supports the governor's recommend, which is different than saying you're opposed to what the House did. And the other piece from the testimony I heard is that the House's justification for this swap is that those monies are meant to go out sooner rather than later to spur the economy, or to get it back out into the economy to recover from the pandemic. So I'm currently leaning towards supporting the House proposal, but I'd love to give Michelle one more chance to, or thoughts to steer where I'm coming down on the House's recommended changes on this front, on shifting those monies around.
So Anthea, could you put the language back up on the
Sure
screen?
thing.
That's where they got the 3 million for town highway aid, which if we do it, we didn't want to put it out a different way, 1 million more for PV incentives. And that's where the 600 for mileage smart. So that's where that 4.7 adds up to for those three things.
Thank
That's
you.
according to my notes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is right. So at this time, we don't support the House changes. We support the governor's recommend. And, I think that we have concerns that there are a lot of funding streams that are coming to the state and to the municipalities. And the governor's recommend for the town highway programs was substantial in relation to prior funding levels. We did the catch up, and then I think we did a little more beyond the catch up. And so we felt that the town highway funding levels were adequate for moving forward at this time, recognizing that there will be more resources coming to the state as we move forward. And then as far as swapping out funds for other incentives, including EV incentives, et cetera, I think that could put outward pressure on our CRRSA fund, the COVID fund plan for FY23, because the House proposal would draw from our FY23 proposal, moving funds into FY22. And with the amount of uncertainty we currently have related to the federal funding streams that will be coming, we'd prefer not to overcommit early in the process and go with the recommendations we have, whether it's for EV incentives or for EV charging stations, et cetera. We know that those are two areas that will be highlighted in the infrastructure bill by the president and likely in the reauthorization bill. So that's where we stand at this time.
Thanks.
Okay, yep. Committee, any comments?
Well, I think the House was doing this before we had the ARPA money coming out. And so with towns getting, we ought to take a look at the additional federal money coming out. If we wanted to do something out of that highway grant for what is town highway aid, I wouldn't recommend that. I think we would use we should use it for one-time structural or culvert. But the incentives, it seems like there's so many different ways incentives are coming down. And with the climate change plan, I can't help but believe there won't be more there. So I think that the question is one of timing and knowing maybe how all of this comes together and the extent to which we want to make decisions on these. I am concerned about a program shutting down. I think that we've all acknowledged that that's that's difficult, but that's only 600, or if we moved it up to 750. I think the question is more money for the town highway aid and then the vehicle incentive add-on, which in all fairness was done in an environment before we knew we had the additional money. Now we haven't agreed, the governor's put forth his plan, but out of the ARPA money, the recommendation before us is $100 million to support that climate action plan. And I can't help but believe with transportation, the largest sector for carbon emissions, that there won't be recommendations that relate to the transformation of the fleet. So maybe it's better to have the benefit of that work before we make commitments. That's all, that's just my thinking right now. Towns, I believe between towns and counties, it's, that doesn't include, I don't think the MPO money was like 176 million going out to towns. And I'm sure there are plenty of ways, you know, with the municipalities that they could use that money. The question is 3 million relative to 176. How does that look?
A lot of money going to
Mhm.
town. They got a lot of money coming in extra this year.
Senator
Point,
Miller?
Eric.
Bertschlik, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with most of what Jane just, or Senator Kitchell just said. But I think as far as going through the bill, we can leave this open because we're going to need to talk about it. And those specific different funding things come up later in the bill. So we can look at the, whatever it is, the 4 or 5 things that the House added for that money, and then maybe go through them one at a time or as a group. Because, right, Anthea, that's later in the bill where that's specifically, so
Yeah.
we can deal with it there. Because I do support the increased incentives for the EV incentives, because it's important to make sure we have the money there and get moving on this kind of market transformation. It just frees up money in the future.
Sit in the house, yeah.
You know, it's less that they might have to do in the future, but I think it's important to make sure that we are running on that. And I also agree on the capstone. We don't want that program to run out, but I'm more flexible on the town highway aid.
The towns are excited about that money, and everybody's got the right attitude that I've talked to, is that they just have these lingering infrastructure problems that they've just trying to piece together, trying to figure out, trying to stretch. And the ones I've talked to just all have the right attitude about it. Just, hey, this is a one-time thing. Let's fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
So we have to keep it open till we make final decisions on the
it open.
money.
all right, okay.
Okay, so section 3A, this is from the Agency of Transportation, and this is just the accidental inclusion of the Bridge 61 in Springfield, Vermont project. It was accidentally put in program development, and it should be in town highway bridges.
Oh,
No,
I want to
thank you,
spend a
Margaret.
lot of time on that correction.
Sounds like
I
a
think
check
we-
mark.
I think we could close it out.
Okay,
You have now officially closed out your first section.
Oh,
all
good.
right, boy, pretty exciting there.
Gotta start
Okay.
someplace.
Yeah,
Next one is maybe a little bit more discussion necessary, although I haven't been with you all this week when you heard about US Route 4. But this is with section 3B, 3C, and then your effective date section. In section 3C, the repeal of that US Route 4 permit, and you have that being effective on July 1 of 2022, I believe. I'll just need to confirm that in the effective date section. But then in section 3B, as it's drafted here, it's providing this background information about the intent of the General Assembly to repeal this permit, but that the Agency of Transportation needs to work with the town of Woodstock through this project, the PC 21 project, and then an explanation as to why the repeal on July 1, 2022 lines up with the project and the changes that are going to be made there. So the really big thing to take away is under 3C and the effective dates, you're going to get the repeal of the permit July 1, 2022. It doesn't mean, if you go with this language, that you're not going to have someone or a town coming in and saying next year during that legislative session, push the repeal out another year, we need more time. So you're saying it's repealed July 1, 2022. And then you're also having the language about the intent for the project and the agency to work with the town and why the timeline works. So 3B is doing nothing more than expressing intent. Where you get the actual legal change is 3C with the repeal, and then the effective date having it be July 1 of 2022.
well, we're serious about it, and I think that makes a statement. Anybody have any objection to that?
My only comment would be if the state's going to be done in Woodstock this year, why would we wait until July of next year instead of this year? But that's probably minor, but it seems like if we are serious about it, let's just get it going. But I suppose if there's a date on file, then that's good enough. But
Any comments? I think Michelle, you have any comments on that? I think there was a little wiggle room to keep negotiating. Is that correct, or?
Well, we will be evaluating how our the current program that we're implementing this summer with the construction project works. And we're going to continue to work with the town as long as needed to arrive at solutions that work for them from a safety perspective. So whether it's July 1st of this year or July 1st of next year, it's the agency has no input on that.
I mean, it's July, it could be January, it could be any number. It's not, if you want, the committee want to leave it at July, or you're thinking about something different, or open
I think
that?
it's fair for next July. I don't want to rush it too bad, so I think the date as is makes sense.
Okay, July, okay.
Hmm.
Anybody have any comments? We'll close that one out or not?
July of
Okay with it.
2022, huh?
yeah, I mean, I don't care. I'll go with how the committee feels about it, but why let them keep on issuing tickets for a whole extra year when there's a mitigation plan in place? And we're pretty determined that we're gonna put an end to it. I just don't see why a whole nother year to allow them to. For me, I mean, I always want to be careful with my language, but I just see it as a harassment of truck drivers. But I don't know. That's where I'm at. But I'll go with however the committee decides.
The testimony that we got was that the construction, that this is going to be all through this construction season. So I think having it a year from now does
Or you could split the difference. and go
does give time, give us latitude to make sure that the projects are completed and whatever needs to be put in place is reasonable in light of the testimony we got. But somebody said Route 4 is going to be torn up a lot of this construction season in order to get these safety projects implemented. So I'm okay with the July.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll have a soft approval, and I think it's pretty well go for it. But if we really want to get any information before we finalize it, we could take it up. Okay. Let's move.
I'm okay with it as it is.
Okay. All right. Okay, Anthea.
Okay, so your next section is going to be the $3 million to town highway aid. And the thing I'll say here is there's language in here that is, and this is in subsection B, making it clear that this is not used to increase the floor in subsequent years for that calculation. I think the committee was very concerned if this language did stay in, that it be very obvious that this is one-time money. I think that's happening in a number of ways. You're using one time in the language, one time is being used in the big bill for the appropriation. You've got this crouching of it's not increasing the floor. But I think before you even get to that decision, you need to make a decision on whether or not you want the section to stay in at all, and whether if it does stay in, you want it to be the 3 million. So I think we can deal with the language if you want to keep it in, if there are changes that you want to the language.
When this was determined, the 3 million, was the other grant program already announced from the federal government?
No,
Town grants?
no, it would have, right
Because
now, that's still under
I'll bring it
development.
back to Colchester's getting 1.6 million on the other grant.
I think
Not that they can't use it. I just want to bring that up for
No,
discussion.
I think we've got two things here. One of which is, do we want to give additional money to the towns?
Right.
I think if we do, then we wouldn't, I think there's agreement. We don't, if we do, this is not where we would put the money. We would, whatever the amount, 3 million, 1 million, 2 million, we would want to put it into structures, which are investments and are one time, you know, and so it's not as, it's not, it gives you the long-term investment as opposed to town highway aid, which is just routine maintenance and, as you say, vehicle replacement or whatever they want to use it on.
Right.
So I think we could, I'm willing to say, we take this out of town highway aid. If we decide we want to put money to municipalities, my recommend, you know, I think then we have to decide, is this the way we want to move it out? And if we say no, then we set aside the decision how much and where. But my thinking is this isn't where I would want to put it.
Yes, Senator Bertzick.
I basically agree with Senator Kitchell, but I wanted to ask if people remember, or if Anthea knows, what 3 million gets. I know it's by town, different miles, so it changes like Colchester to Ludlow. But do we know what kind of an average grant we're talking about for a town?
I don't know that off the top of my head, and I don't know if Michelle would either, but I do know that there's a chart that actually gives the additional amount for each town. I think based to the 3 million, it was prepared by the agency at the request of House Transportation. So
Yeah,
I think
can
you get
find
very
that.
detailed information.
Is it
I'll
like
find that.
$20,000 or like 200? I mean, it must be in the tens of thousands if it's all towns and it's only 3 million.
It varies big time because, you know, by mileage and things. So it does vary, even small towns. But, you know, I go back to the town grant is that it can be used for anything. You could buy 3 new pickup trucks if you wanted to. My fear is of this program is that once you establish that $3 million, you're not going to pull it back next year. I'll tell you, you're going to hear an outcry. That's going
And
to
that's one of the benefits of putting it through structures, which would be bridges and culverts.
Now, having said that, we also, I was looking at the list the other day of that, how much went to the towns, how many million on the, and every town is getting a big chunk of money, a portion to the town, but that was unknown, I guess, at this time. So, like I said, anytime you're going to build a base, even though you say it's a one-time deal, once you build that base, it's like school or anything else. You're not going to take it back. Next year, I'll bet everything you'll start with that 3 million. It'll be a $30 million grant, total highway aid package, rather than go back to 27 million. Even though you say one-time deal, that's
Well, it seems like one-time money aligns itself to a self-contained kind of investment.
We've heard that over and over and over again. Don't spend it on operating expenses. Spend it on one-time infrastructure improvements. The governor said it. The government said it. Everybody's saying, Jane, you said it in your committee. Make sure you spend the money on not going salaries or whatever. You could spend it on one-time infrastructure improvements. So I know it's something that, yes, Michelle?
Yes, senators, I just wanted to just give you a little bit of a flavor of what the allocation would be. So for towns like Colchester, it would be about $24,000. The town of St. George, $363. You know, the town of Berkshire, $13,000. So, you know, it's based on mileage. And so I would say that none of these grants really top over much over 25,000, and most of them are in between 7,500 and 15,000.
So taking the little town of Berkshire, if they needed a culvert and that came in at 100,000, that would it allows you to be strategic in terms of how the money is going out, as opposed to just all as I've said so oftentimes, the line, all shall be winners and all shall have prizes, or the extent to which you want to really direct and make your, the investments in a more strategic way.
And coming from a small town where I was on the select board, I mean, we always had these small projects that were just, we never had enough money. And again, being careful about where Senator Kitchell is kind of asking to pinpoint the money, but like we had an old boiler in the town hall. I mean, we knew it was inefficient. We knew that we were spending more money. We knew we were contributing more to greenhouse gases, but we never had enough money to fix it. Or a roof on one of our buildings. We just limped it along and just tried to do whatever we could do. And that type of money that you're talking about, yes, I understand that we got to be careful not to set precedent, but it does help to get you over that hump to make things better.
Yes,
Senator Mazza?
go ahead.
My other question is, that there's the competitive grants, the structured grants. Are bridges separate? Wasn't there two different options for competitive grants to towns? It's a question for Michelle or Anthea maybe, or anybody.
Yes, Senator, I'm happy to answer that. There's a town highway structures program, and then there's a town highway class 2 program, which is for like roadway related projects.
Like that's paving and things. The class 2 program.
Yeah, I would
So-
say where you're going to get the lasting impact of investing these funds would be in the structures program. And when I say structures, it could be a large culvert, it could be a bridge, etc.
Or we could put a language in there for the 3 million that it has to be used specifically for structures, or it can't be included in the 27 million.
Capital, yeah, I suppose capital funds and infrastructure.
But
I don't
for
know.
some of them, it's so little, it's,
Yeah.
Berkshire was what?
$300.
Yeah.
Well, for the record, I support Senator Kitchell's proposal. I'm not opposed to putting it in the class 2 program, just for like Senator Ingalls is saying, from my experience on the select board, some of these paving projects that aren't on the town road were just not possible for us to ever come up with the money to do. So we just had to wait till our turn came around.
Yeah.
And the roads would get pretty bad, and we were, begging Cabot Creamery to give us more money
Right,
and stuff like that. So
Is that
I'm not
program-
opposed to
Yeah.
some money going, 2 million for structures and 1 million for class 3, because I think that helps the.
Would there be enough for structures if every town applied for something? How does that
Probably
work?
not for 3 million.
No,
So
No.
you're rejecting some towns then? It would become on a first come, first served basis? What
No.
is the limit you can draw from that? Is it $100,000 or 10,000 or 5,000? Is there a limit?
100 up to 175,000, and for both programs, I guess we'll talk about that in a minute.
And
Wow.
the House would
But-
increase that.
So that would eat it up pretty fast then. Maybe 4 or 5 towns would eat it all up.
So, yeah, and that's why we have our rotating plan where we, every 3 years or so, every town gets a big project. And what we would do is use that same rotation, and that would add about 17 more towns or so if every town needed the maximum amount. Their turn would come up sooner.
Or we
And
could
so-
reduce the maximum amount. We could reduce the maximum amount, right?
You could reduce the maximum amount, or you could stick with the same one and just expedite things. And
Well,
I think,
It is 11:15. We are on the floor in 15 minutes. Give everybody a chance to have a cup of coffee or something. We're not going to solve this, I don't think, right off, but it puts thoughts in everybody's mind what to think about going into this. And I think with that, unless I hear something urgent, we'll end today. And we will reconvene next week and continue our discussion where we left off. Is that all right?